All right, I'll call the Tuesday, July 27th Board of Adjustments meeting to order. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes of the March 23rd, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? All right. Item 2 on the agenda, new business. We have an appeal of an administrative decision. I'll turn it over to Aaron.
All right, thank you and good morning. So before we jump into this, it's probably been maybe a couple of years, I think, since the Board of Adjustment has last seen an appeal. So I thought it'd be good to just quick go over what the Land Development Code has to say about the review process. So as outlined in Section 2009-16 of the Land Development Code, in dealing with appeals of administrative decisions, the Board of Adjustment is to grant the administrative official's decision a presumption of correctness, and the burden of persuasion of error is on the appellant at the meeting today. The Board of Adjustment may reverse or affirm wholly or partly, or may modify the decision being appealed. Appeals may be sustained only upon a finding by the Board of Adjustment that the administrative official erred. And then a concurring vote of 4 members is required to reverse any decision of an administrative official. So similar to a variance, it does require that those 4 votes. So in terms of the appeal on the agenda here today, this appeal has to do with a sign permit that was issued on November 28th, 2008. Sign permit number SG200806664. The appellant is Josh Gilland with iDigital Outdoor, who is present here today. The subject property is located at 3980 Highway 81 North in Fargo, which is located just essentially northwest of the airport, east side of I-29, just south of 40th Avenue North, as shown on the image on the slide here and in your packet. And so the question before the board today is, did staff err in its determination that sign permit number SG200806664, dated November 28th, 2008, is expired, and that the proposed sign can no longer be constructed under the terms of that sign permit? And so just a little bit of background on some of the events and what the kind of details of the situation are. Back in 2008, the sign permit in question was issued for a 672 square foot off-premise off-premise billboard on the subject property. Later that year, in 2008, the foundation for the billboard was installed, and then no further construction took place in regards to the sign that was permitted. A few years later, in 2011, the City of Fargo adopted a new sign code, and that new sign code actually restricts off-premise billboards to a maximum of 300 square foot at this subject property, just due to the factors such as location, not being located immediately adjacent to the interstate, and also based on the zoning district and some of those contextual things. So in 2012, the subject property ownership changed. The property was conveyed to a different ownership group. And then in 2021, the City of Fargo Building Inspections Department received a request to construct the billboard on the foundation that was poured in 2008, based on the construction drawings that were submitted back with the original sign permit application in 2008. Building inspection staff determined that the sign permit was expired, and that the owner and the appellant could not construct the sign as proposed. And so we received the appeal of an administrative decision that's included in your packet, and that's why we're here today. So some of the relevant facts for this case that are outlined in the staff report there, just the location of the subject property, 3980 Highway 81. The sign permit in question is dated November 28th, 2008. The proposed billboard sign was never constructed at the subject property. The owner listed on a sign permit application and the sign permit from back in 2008 is listed as Courier Company. And then the current owner of the subject property is 6037 Williston LLC. So those are some of the relevant facts that staff feels is important to this discussion here today. And then some of the relevant code provisions that we just want to point out here quick. The first one here is from the Land Development Code, Section 2013-03F. Kind of towards the bottom here, it talks about that nothing in this section shall be construed to allow a sign or supporting sign structure to not conform to the International Building Code, Chapter 21, or the Electrical Code, Chapter 23 of the Fargo Municipal Code. Additionally, 2013-03J, both of these sections on this slide, I should mention, are from the Fargo Sign Code. The Fargo Sign Code is located within the Land Development Code, just to clarify that. The second provision there states that all signs must comply with applicable provisions of the International Building Code and the Electrical Code and Fargo Municipal Code, Article 2001 and Chapter 23, respectively. So one of the claims that the appellant is making is that a sign permit is different than a building permit, and sign permits don't expire. And so the reason that these code provisions are important is because it is stated within the sign code that signs must comply with building code. On the next slide here, I'll just jump down to the second provision, is actually a section from the International Building Code, Section 105.5, that talks, that speaks to expiration of any permit under the building code. It states that every permit issued shall become invalid unless the work on the site authorized by such permit is commenced within 180 days after its issuance, or if the work authorized on the site by such permit is suspended or abandoned for a period of 180 days after the time the work is commenced. The building official is authorized to grant an extension in writing. Is kind of the gist of that one. I'll just kind of skip over this one for now, but that's just the provision of the Land Development Code that talks about the appeal process. And so jumping forward then to staff's analysis of the situation, staff argues that sign permits are not valid in perpetuity. The Building Code, Section 2013-03J, requires all signs comply with the International Building Code. The International Building Code, Section 105.5, states that permits issued become invalid if work is suspended or abandoned for a period of 180 days. Work on the sign in question has been suspended for 12 years. Since the foundation was installed in 2008, there has been no further work on the sign that was permitted in 2008. The city received no request for extension of this 2008 sign permit either. Another relevant number of factors here is that the sign permit was issued to a previous property owner. Excuse me, let me start over here. The sign permit issued to a previous property owner is not valid for a new owner. And so as I mentioned earlier, Courier Company was listed as the owner on the sign permit application and the sign permit back in 2008. However, the property is now currently owned by a different ownership entity, 6037 Williston LLC. A new owner must apply for a new permit if they wish to complete work covered by the permit granted to a previous owner. Here again, staff was never contacted regarding changing ownership relative to the sign permit in question here. And so ultimately, the appellant's request to construct a billboard in accordance with the 2008 sign permit cannot be approved by staff since the permit expired and the property is under new ownership. Staff contends that the appellant has not demonstrated that staff erred in its determination that the sign cannot be constructed. And then last again, the Land Development Code expressly states that the Board of Adjustment shall grant to the administrative official's decision a presumption of correctness, placing burden of persuasion of error on the appellant. And so ultimately our recommendation is to affirm staff's decision to not allow the construction of the sign in accordance with the 2008 sign permit. With that, that's just kind of an overview. We do have building inspection staff with us here today. The building inspections department does administer the sign code, and so they're much more knowledgeable than I on some of the nuances and details of the case here. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, as would inspection staff.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Is there any questions for staff? No? Okay. Go ahead.
I had one question. Would the city have approved this application for the current sign that they're looking to build if it was still the previous owner, or are they trying to use this application to build a 752 square foot sign?
Yeah, I can try and answer that. So there's really two reasons, that we outlined here that city staff would not allow the billboard to be permitted. And so the ownership is one reason, and the expiration, more than 180 days, is the other reason. And so for either of those two reasons, staff would deny the request to construct in accordance with the 2008 permit.
I guess my question is, would the new ownership be able to build a sign here if they applied for a new permit?
And so, no, not the size of billboard that they're looking for. So the original permit was for a 672 square foot billboard. There was a new sign code was adopted in 2011, and that the current sign code today would only allow a maximum 300 square foot sign face for a billboard at this site.
So even if this property never changed hands, they would still be subject to the current code requiring them to only to build
Correct.
300 square foot.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions for staff at the time? No? Would the appellant wish to speak?
Yes, please. Good morning. That's loud. Good morning, board members and administrative officials. Thanks for hearing this case on appeal. I didn't realize it's been a couple of years since anyone's appealed, so I guess I'm honored to be the first here in a couple of years to do this. Just wanted to outline a couple of things. I basically have two arguments or reasonings that this appeal is before you today. The first, Dave Courier with Courier Companies, he also currently owns the property. They just put it into a different LLC a number of years ago, I'd imagine for tax reasons. He had applied for the permit. He was told at the time, the inspection department, he asked specifically what he needed to do to make sure that permit was solidified and put a little color to it. Back then, it was just before the city sign code commission had started. Rumors were there was going to be an abatement of signs, a moratorium, if you will. So they wanted to get those permits in, and so that they were grandfathered into place. I mean, that was his goal. There's also a second property on 52nd he did that with. He was told, as long as the foundation's in the ground, the permit will be solidified. I did submit an affidavit that he had written and was notarized in regards to that. So, what he was told by city officials is really a he said, she said situation, but he's a fairly reputable person in the community, and I don't see any reason why we would think that he's telling any other truth. They did spend a substantial amount of money, probably upwards of $20,000 to put that foundation in. The cost to do that same foundation today is probably $30,000 to $35,000. So there's a substantial amount of concrete in the ground. They would have had to bring excavators into place to pull the dirt out. There's a reinforced steel cage in there that's quite expensive. So point being, he spent a lot of money to do this, with the intentions that permit was going to be solidified. And so I think that's my primary argument. That's my initial argument, was that he was told this, he thought he did the right thing, and then now he's being told he can't complete the sign. So in doing some of the research for this appeal, I came to another argument or reasoning for the permit, and it really comes down to a difference between a temporary permit and what we would consider a perpetual permit. I know that Aaron had stated that their position is there's not perpetual permits, but every single billboard that is in town has a permit attached to it. I can call up the inspections department or email them, and I can request a copy of those permits. And those permits are the only thing that outlines that billboard exists and that billboard is allowed to exist. There's no license. There's nothing that comes with that billboard other than that permit. So the fact that to make the argument that permit is not perpetual, I find it hard to make that argument because the permit doesn't expire. It carries forward, and it also carries forward beyond the landowner. I would probably dare to say right off the top of my head, more than 80% of the permits out there are not issued to the current property owner. You know, most of the locations that anyone could name off the top of their head, I can tell you that most of those properties over the years have transferred hands. You know, normally we wouldn't be in an appeal situation because if a permit had expired, I would just merely go to the inspections department and say, hey, can I renew this? Because the normal process is, you know, the typically 180 days, they, you know, around that time, we usually call them and say, what do we need to do? And they're like, as long as construction started, you know, we'll grant extensions. Okay. The reason this is before you is because this permit would be considered a non-conforming grandfathered permit, right? So the city sign code calls out the non-conforming signs, the 672 square inches or square feet of space. And so that's really the difference. And I think, Matthew, you had asked the question, would they be able to put the sign up? So we'd still be able to put a sign up at 300 square feet, but not the 672 square feet. So that's really the difference. And for us as a company up in that area, it's more rural, it's not developed, you know, a smaller sign like that just probably doesn't make financial sense for us to do. So that's the reason why we're pushing forward with the appeal, to see what the thought process is amongst the board members here today. So, you know, the city sign code really doesn't call out the revocation, suspension, termination of a permit. And so when I made a phone call to inspections department, they said that the International Building Code was used. I looked up that interpretation and definition, and it really lends itself to a temporary permit. You know, that permit expires, it has an end life. You know, when you deal with permitting a building or a home, that building or home, its existence is not dependent upon that permit once the construction is complete. So where a billboard does, that permit must be in place, it must carry forward. I can pull that permit at any time for any location for any of the sign owners in town. So so it really comes down to a difference of interpretation. And I think it lent itself to a bigger issue, and that's why I'm also here today, is to discuss that idea of putting into the city sign code at some point the idea of a perpetual permit versus a temporary. I think there's conflicting descriptions and conflicting definitions of the terminology. So it's really a mixed bag, and so people can kind of grab what they want and what they don't want, right? It's a big gray area right now. I feel there's enough conflicting issues between what an actual billboard permit is and what the International Building Code defines it as. So I think it lends itself that at the very least out of this meeting, that should be discussed by inspections or whoever handles the altering of the sign code. Maybe it starts in a committee and works its way up to the city council for approval. But I think there's enough gray area there that also it lends itself that you as board members will have enough gray area to make that discretion and interpretation in this case. So as I stated with the temporary permits, you know, they end. The building or the structure that was created with the permit isn't dependent upon the permit, where with the perpetual permits, they are, right? With a perpetual permit or billboard permit, you know, if there's work that needs to be done on the billboard, we don't have to get another building permit. You know, if we want to change a digital sign, we can pull one down, swap one out. If, you know, parts on the structure need to be changed, we don't, as long as we aren't going outside of the definition of the permit itself, of what it was originally issued for, it's my understanding that we don't need an additional permit. So further proof that it's a perpetual permit, right? Now, if I were to change that permit or change that sign in such a way where it would be looked at as we altered it outside the definition of the permit, then I would expect that we would have to file a new permit. I think there's also something to consider when we talk about, and it's probably lingering in the minds of everybody, is the expiration of a permit. You know, what defines that? You know, if the work stops, well, at what point does the work stop? Who makes that definition? Where is that gray area? Does it stop at the foundation? Does it stop at the column pipe? Does it stop at the head unit? Does it stop at, is it complete when I finally get the trim on that billboard? If I'm missing a part on the billboard, is it not complete? If I don't put an advertisement up, is it not complete? There's a lot of gray area here as to what defines the completion of that permit. And again, the permit doesn't expire, right? The permit stays with the sign. So I think my argument is that the city or the inspections department should be allowed to be in a position to issue a termination for that permit. You know, if a property, you know, if we were to fix what the situation is now, I think the proper procedure going forward would be to issue a termination letter to the property owner stating that this permit no longer exists, you haven't finished it, thereby at least allowing the property owner to say, well, look, I was told this, I'll finish it right now. Okay, go ahead and finish it. Problem solved, both parties are happy. We don't have that process in place right now, so now we're in a huge gray area where one party thought they were doing the right thing. A new administrative part, you know, officials are in place now, probably not the same people back in 2008. And so we have a whole new set of rules, whole new set of interpretations of some of these existing laws and ordinances. So now we've got just two different perspectives, right? I was hoping to maybe take some questions, some back and forth. I mean, I don't want to beat you guys to death or put you to sleep at all. So I'd rather really focus down on some of the issues or questions and concerns that you would have in regards to this, so that we can really get down to the nuts and bolts. You know, if it doesn't go in our favor, that's fine. But I think there's a relevant issue here that needs to get addressed. And I'd like to at least open up some debate for that, so that we could talk through the differences between interpretation and what's actually is being used right now. You know, the permit's being used in a perpetual manner. So we should address that, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for the appellant?
Josh, you had referenced a notarized document. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I worked with Dave Courier on the administrative appeal. And Dave Courier, I was hoping it was in your packet. I submitted it with the original administrative appeal. And Dave stated, you know, Fargo resident applied for a permit. I'm just kind of ad-libbing here, but I can certainly give you copies of this. Stated what he was told by city officials, that he inquired with his intention to make this, you know, a non-conforming grandfathered sign or grandfathered sign permit. Spent $15,000 to $20,000 on the engineering foundation installation. You know, and it, you know, one of the arguments too is that, you know, the Couriers own a steel fabrication shop. It probably wouldn't have been a big deal for them to finish putting up the rest of that sign or put up a column pipe. You know, to put up a column pipe for them probably would have cost them another $1,000 or $1,500. I'm pretty sure he would have been willing to do that had he been told, you know, the correct procedure to do. So I think it just further lends itself that he's being truthful in the situation, because I don't think it would have been a lot of extra money for him to finish, you know, doing what he thought he needed to do from what he was told by the city to make sure that that permit was solidified.
Any other questions for the applicant or the city?
So do you have record of who you spoke with? And does someone at the city have record of that conversation?
In the affidavit, it stated that it was a phone conversation. So unfortunately, in 2008, I don't know how much emailing was being done. You know, Mr. Courier's fairly computer literate these days, but I'm not sure that, I'm sure he was a typical resistive person in 2008 to using computers. So he was probably a in-person or phone call type of gentleman. So But yeah, and the affidavit does state via phone is how he acquired the information. Yeah, it'd be really nice if there was an email. We could go back to the email, but that was the reason for the affidavit. Also outlining that he's a well-respected person. You know, he doesn't really need the sign or anything, but you know, he's just stating facts. So.
I have a question for someone in the inspection department, whoever wants to take it. But what is the city's stance on temporary versus permanent permits?
There's no difference in the code. It's very straightforward. There's no gray area, no confliction. It's 180 days. And if requested, we give another 180 days. There's no question about that. You could ask anybody in the inspection department, they'd give you the same answer. If you'd like, I'll address the issue about the affidavit too.
I had a question piggybacking off of that as far as the applicant's statement that it's a perpetual permit in that he wouldn't have to go to the city to apply to alter the sign at any point in the lifetime of the sign. Is that correct? Or would they need to pull a separate permit if, as he stated, it becomes a digital sign?
And I'd just pop in and say maybe alter wasn't the right word, because if we alter it outside of the guidelines of the permit, then yes, I'd expect to get a new permit. But to do maintenance, to change faces, to change digital boards, you know, to change advertising, you know, trim goes bad, we can go up and replace it. New technology comes out for poster boards, we can go put that up. So
I guess to alter my question, what is the extent of that alteration?
So he mentions perpetual. Billboards are permitted, and once they're installed, we can consider them, excuse me, perpetual. As long as they're not changed, modified, they can last forever. We don't go back in time. They're kind of, we'll use the word grandfather, but they can change the sign face. Maybe Melissa can talk to that.
If they want to do maintenance essentially, or, you know, the sign face is intended to be changeable, but if they remove the head of the sign, then essentially that sign doesn't exist anymore and they would have to take out a new permit to replace that head, even if it's the exact same size as the original. And so that was, the last appeal that we had was the same question, was if I take down part of a sign and want to put it back up, does it have to meet the current sign code? And the answer was yes. And so we consider, you know, it's no different than a building. The permit is to construct the structure. It's not for the sign to exist in the future, it's to do the construction. Just the same as a building permit is to do the construction of the building. So you don't have to have the permit existing forever. You only need the permit for the time of the construction.
So in a scenario where if the applicant had built the billboard to completion at the time of 2008 and has now, in 2021, requested to build or replace that sign head with a digital, they would have to have a new application, new permit.
Correct.
Be subject to the current sign codes at that time.
Right.
yeah, and I think that the digital part of that is definitely, we've identified that with city administration officials or inspection administrative officials, is that if a sign goes from static to digital, you'd have to reapply for a permit. We're talking static. We're going to keep it static, so it'd just be static to static. So we're not looking at going digital at that location.
Has this particular case happened before, or is this a very rare occurrence as far as someone takes out a permit, starts construction, doesn't finish it, doesn't get an extension, and therefore the permit becomes invalid?
With billboards, it's generally, they don't start construction at all. And so then the permit just expires because it was never constructed. So this is the first time I've seen it for a sign where they've done just the foundation and then wanted to continue an extensive period of time later.
Bruce, you mentioned you'd be willing to address the affidavit or make a comment on that.
Yes. If I could approach the bench.
You may.
There were only two other gentlemen.
Thank you.
So as far as the affidavit is concerned, the inspection department writes thousands of permits a year, upwards of 10,000 permits. We do the same thing for every permit. There's no gray area, but we get to make decisions on the 180 and the extension for the 180. Expiration is not complicated. It is 180. And nobody in our department would ever say that if you install a foundation, that you get to construct what you want on top of that forever. I've produced you 2 affidavits from the only other 2 people that worked in our department that worked with signs, Jerome Miller and John Shea, who agree with the statement. And you could ask anybody in our department, they'd say the same thing. Nobody would ever say, you can install a foundation and do anything you want in the future at any time. It's never done. That's my address for that affidavit.
And I would definitely agree with that statement. I mean, I wouldn't either, but the question posed was, what do I need to do to keep the permit, to get it to a grandfathered, situation to solidify the permit? And he was told, as long as you have the foundation in. So it's a different question than the one Bruce posed, but I mean, I think, because I agree with your question and your affidavit and your statement. I completely agree. I would never say, yeah, you can throw the foundation and put something up 14 years later. But the question was posed differently, and I don't think anyone had foreseen, 14 years later, are we going to finish the top, right? But what I will tell you is, had he been told something different at any point in that 14 years, he would have done it. You know what I mean? Had he been issued a statement that that permit's going to expire or it's going to be revoked, I know Mr. Courier would have finished it. I mean, it's not a question of money or anything. It's a question that he had the permit, he wanted the permit to be solidified, and he spent the money to do it. I'm sure he'd be willing to spend the rest of the money to finish it. So I don't think he himself even thought 14 years. I'm sure the person that he asked in the inspections department at the time that stated as long as he had the foundation envisioned 14 years. But here we find ourselves fast forward, that many years, and I think it's a valid argument to say that Mr. Courier would have finished the sign had he been told anything otherwise.
So Mr. Courier has taken out many permits in his life. He is aware of the 180. He builds building. Same issue.
Yeah, I don't think it's reasonable, considering the number of permits that the city writes, to monitor each one and say, oh, your 180 days is coming up. We're going to send you a letter and say it's going to expire. You need to do something. So I mean, it is the applicant's responsibility to monitor that and be aware of that condition, just like any other permit condition.
And I would agree that it's just the billboards are such a different animal when it comes to, I mean, back to the same statement, look at the permitting. I mean, one of the statements was, sign code requires all signs must comply with International Building Code. International Building Code doesn't say anything about perpetual permits, doesn't say anything about the permit staying with the sign. I mean, that's a whole nother topic, subject, content. And it nowhere in any of the code does it discuss that. Yet we are using those permits in perpetuity. I mean, the fact is we are using those in perpetuity right now. It may not state it, it may not say that we are, but we actually are, because I can pull a permit from 20 years ago at the city and it's the same permit. I mean, that's what the legal standing for that sign to be in place and exist is that permit when I call the city, right?
If it's constructed.
Is the permit to provide ongoing authority to change the sign in a manner, or is the permit just attached as anyone would build a building or a home? It is permitted. That permit is attached. It doesn't mean that you can't paint your house. Doesn't mean you can't. do
Melissa explained that.
maintenance.
A permit is for a period of time. It has a beginning and an end. When we do the final inspection on that permit, the permit's done. That permit allows that thing to stand in perpetual. That word doesn't show up in the code because it's not really needed. The permit is for the construction, start, final building inspection, then it's done. That thing needs to remain as is. And we have many codes that look for change of use, different types, different signs, sign faces. Any kind of change, the permit is void.
So the permit, as the applicant is addressing, is not needed for the changes. So if that permit was lost, whatever, that would not preclude him from replacing trim or something to that effect.
Correct. So the sign code and the building code line out work that's exempt from permit. And so there are all sorts of maintenance and upkeep things that you can do without having to get a new permit to do the work. And so most of that work falls into the category of things that are exempt from permit. So you can do them without having to get permission, just because otherwise we'd be writing a permit every 20 minutes for some minor project. And it's the same as a building. You don't have to get a permit to paint the house or to, put in new linoleum in your kitchen. But you do have to if you're going to do something that is structural, that is not exempt from permit.
Are there any other questions, or are we ready for a motion?
I just want to reference an appeal that we heard a couple of years ago, and it was a convenience store fueling station, and they had the foundation or the support all there, and they were just wanting to change out and update the sign face. And I think there was a digital intent too, but they had to comply with the current sign code in terms of size, and so they were not allowed to upgrade their sign because of the guidelines of the current sign code. So to me, this relates to that. But I also hear what the appellant is saying.
Is there a motion or further discussion?
I make a motion to affirm staff's decision that sign permit number SG 2000/80664 dated November 28th, 2008 is expired, and that the proposed sign can no longer be constructed under the terms of the sign permit.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion?
I think, going back to Deb's comment or thought, is regardless of when this permit was issued, if it was issued in 2010, right before, or 11, right before that signage was changed, you would still have to conform with the modern code requirements or signage requirements. So to apply or to assume that that previous permit is grandfathering you in to be able to build that sign larger than what is currently applicable, because that sign is not built, and like Deb has referred to the previous appeal in front of us, we are charged in maintaining the current standards. So I believe allowing you to continue to build this as was originally issued wouldn't be concurrent with what our role is here.
Am I allowed to make a key point on that one? Per Fargo City Sign Code, a non-conforming sign is allowed to exist and continue to exist even when damaged, as long as it doesn't cost more than 50% to replace the damage. So a non-conforming sign can continue forward even upon damage, replacement, as long as it doesn't exceed that 50% mark. So
But
I don't know if that makes a difference in your consideration or not,
But there is not a sign to maintain, is I guess what my take is. If there was a sign, if it was built to that size at that date, it can stay. But if you were to change out that head, it'd have to reduce the size. So you would have a point if he had built it at that time to that maximum size. But I don't think we can entertain to build something that size new today. That makes sense.
I'd just like to comment that, we're supposed to determine if the staff erred in their determination. And, based on what was outlined in the code and the fact that the International Building Code is referenced in the code, there's no other discussion in the sign code regarding the expiration of the permit. I mean, it's logical that the inspection department would then fall back to the International Building Code for the expiration. I do agree that, maybe that sign code could be modified to try to clarify that a little bit. It's probably a good suggestion and something staff should maybe look at to see if there's a modification to the code that could maybe make that a little more clear, I should say. So those are my thoughts on it. But are there any other discussion? Are we ready for a vote? Okay. We have a motion and a second, and the motion is the suggested motion in the packet. Please call the roll.
Wendell Dobb,
Yes.
Breen,
Yes?
Heller,
Yes.
Mitchell,
Yes.
Love.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for hearing me out. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
All right, back to our agenda. Item 3, other business. So we have a board member update.
I can speak to that quick. So included in your packet is just a short memorandum. The Board of Adjustment is made up of 6 members total, 5 active members and 1 alternate member. The alternate member position has been vacant since last year, and just recently the City Commission affirmed the mayor's appointment of Michael Orth to the Board of Adjustment. I believe Michael is here today, I'm assuming. We've never met in person, so welcome. And I'm sure you'd be willing to stick around for a couple minutes after today's meeting if you'd like to just introduce yourselves to each other. Also, just a quick note, we have a change in staff. Maggie Squire is no longer with the City of Fargo. She's going to be starting graduate school here this fall. And we have Adam Martin here, just sitting behind me, who will be helping out on the Board of Adjustment here in the future. So we look forward to having him here and then present to you here shortly.
Great, thank you. Item 3B is our annual nomination and election of officers. So is there a recommendation or motion for a chair and vice chair?
Make a recommendation to elect Michael Love to the chairperson.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed,
I
same sign. Okay.
I would also like to make a recommendation for Michael Love as chairperson.
Do we have a motion for vice chair?
I make a motion to nominate Deb Wendell Dobbs as vice chair.
Okay, and I will second that. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. All right, and I believe with that, we are adjourned. If, is there a motion to adjourn?
Do we vote?
We did. We, there was,
Two nominations for chair, was my understanding.
no, he nominated me, and it was seconded, and we voted.
Okay.
And then,
I misunderstood the name that you said. Thank you.
do you wanna, should we redo that if, okay. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.